everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to unpack a scientific mystery from the 17th century that is, well, it's honestly one of the most bizarre things you'll ever hear. We're taking a journey back to a time when microscopes were practically brand new, and scientists were desperately trying to answer one of the deepest questions we can ask: where exactly does new life come from? And trust me, the answers they came up with, they're going to blow your mind.
Okay, picture this. You're a scientist in the late 1600s. You're peering through this very primitive early microscope, squinting at a tiny drop of fluid, and suddenly you are absolutely convinced you've just solved the greatest mystery in nature. You start thinking, what if a human life didn't begin as a new thing at all? What if, hidden right there in the reproductive cell, there was already a complete tiny person, perfectly formed, just waiting to grow bigger? I know, it sounds literally like science fiction to us today, but back then, this was absolute cutting-edge science. So this whole wild concept actually had a name: preformationism. The core idea is right there in the word. Organisms are preformed. And the real star of the show, its most famous and mind-bending mascot, was the homunculus. The homunculus was this theoretical, tiny, curled-up human supposedly hidden away inside a single reproductive cell. And this wasn't just some fringe idea either. This elegant, if incredibly strange concept powerfully shaped centuries of debates about reproduction, heredity, and even the nature of the human soul. To really wrap our heads around how this captured the public's imagination, we've got to look at the year 1694. A Dutch mathematician and physicist named Nicholas Hartsoeker published a sketch that became absolutely legendary. He drew a miniature infant, complete with a tiny head and little limbs, curled up tightly inside the head of a sperm cell. Now, to be fair, Hartsoeker didn't actually claim he saw this tiny person. It was completely hypothetical, a drawing of what he assumed simply must be in there. But that image, it gave the public a powerful way to picture the invisible, and the idea just spread like wildfire.
You've really got to wonder, why did brilliant people actually buy into this? Well, starting around 1677, Antony von Leeuwenhoek discovered these tiny wriggling things in human and animal fluids. He called them animalcules. But because his microscopes were incredibly crude and blurry, human imagination kind of just filled in the blanks. Leeuwenhoek actually thought he was seeing nerves, veins, and arteries in these microscopic cells. Plus, the idea that the entire future child was delivered entirely by the father, with the mother acting simply as a living incubator, well, that fit very neatly into the patriarchal assumptions of the era.
Section 1. The Great Divide, the Scientific Civil War.
So the scientific community literally split right down the middle over this. On one side, we had the spermists, sometimes called animalculists. Following Leeuwenhoek and Hartsoeker, they believed the whole future child was packaged up in the sperm, and the mother was basically just providing a hospitable environment to grow. But on the exact opposite side, a fierce rival faction emerged: the ovists. They argued the exact reverse. Ovists believed the miniature organism already existed inside the mother's egg, and it was the father's role to simply trigger its development.
Now, you're probably thinking, were these ovists just making things up? Actually, no. They had what they considered to be incredibly compelling evidence. Back in 1673, Marcello Malpighi looked at unincubated chicken eggs and saw tiny, pre-existing structures. Even earlier, in 1669, Jan Swammerdam dissected caterpillars and found future butterfly wings and legs already hidden inside. Now, today we understand these are just different stages of development, but to the ovists, this was absolute proof that nature was full of hidden, ready-made designs just waiting to expand.
Section 2. Emboîtement, the Russian doll theory. This is where things get really wild. A French philosopher named Nicolas Malebranche took this ovist theory to a completely astonishing, mind-bending extreme called emboîtement. It basically turned human reproduction into literal Russian nesting dolls. They argue that if you have the mother's egg, and inside that egg is a preformed tiny girl, well then that tiny girl must also have tiny eggs inside her, and inside those eggs are her future daughters, and so on, infinitely. According to this theory, every single human being who would ever live had already been perfectly nestled inside each other since the literal dawn of time. I know, it sounds totally unhinged, right? But the reason brilliant minds embraced it was because of its massive philosophical appeal. It solved some really heavy theological puzzles of the day. If every life was pre-packed at the very beginning of the universe, God didn't need to constantly intervene to create new souls out of nothing. It meant the universe remained orderly, fixed, and totally planned out. Even the great philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz supported forms of this theory. He saw the universe as this grand place of hidden, waiting life, rather than just chaotic dead matter. And then, the ovist camp got this massive boost of momentum in the 18th century thanks to a Swiss naturalist named Charles Bonnet. Bonnet was studying aphids, and he discovered something amazing. They could reproduce without males. Now, this is a real biological phenomenon called parthenogenesis, but for Bonnet, this was the ultimate proof. He thought if offspring could appear without any male contribution at all, then clearly the complete blueprint for life had been sitting right there inside the mother's egg all along. With evidence like that, ovivism started picking up some incredibly heavyweight supporters. Albrecht von Haller, who was one of the most respected Swiss physiologists of his entire generation, threw his full weight behind ovivist preformationism. Then you had Lazzaro Spallanzani in the 1780s. He filtered frog semen during artificial insemination experiments and wrongly concluded that the liquid itself, just the liquid, triggered the pre-existing egg. When powerful scientific authorities like Haller and Spallanzani back a theory, it becomes incredibly difficult to challenge, even when their experiments were deeply flawed. But, and this is an absolutely crucial point here, despite all the sketches, the fierce debates, and the grand philosophical theories, no one ever actually saw a homunculus. Not Hartsoeker, not Leeuwenhoek, not a single person. It was purely a thought experiment. It was born out of crude technology and this deep, understandable human desire for order and predictability in a really mysterious world.
Section 3. The epigenesis revolution. A rival theory emerges.
Eventually, the cracks in preformationism really began to show. A rival theory emerged, known as epigenesis, and it directly upended the entire homunculus concept. Instead of life starting out as a fully made miniature person, epigenesis argued that structures emerge and develop gradually, step by step, from relatively unformed material. So, life was a process of dynamic, complex building, not just inflating a tiny human balloon. One of the first real logical wrecking balls to hit the homunculus theory came from Georges-Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon. He pointed out a completely glaring flaw: mixed inheritance. Think about it. If an entire, complete child is hidden inside just one parent's cell, either the sperm or the egg, then how on earth do children inherit traits from both their mother and their father? Preformationism had absolutely zero good answers for this very basic, everyday reality. Still, for almost a century, preformationism ruled the day. But the momentum officially shifted in 1759. That's when Caspar Friedrich Wolff published some incredibly careful observations of chick embryos. Unlike the guys before him, Wolff actually proved that organs weren't just magically expanding, they were forming gradually over time from simpler material. He struck the very first major, strictly scientific blow that kicked off the long decline of the preformationist empire.
So this basically set the stage for one of the biggest clashes of the era, the Grand Debate. On one side, you had Haller defending the ovist homunculus, effectively representing the old guard of grand, comforting philosophical certainty. On the other side, Wolff insisted on dynamic epigenesis, representing this brand new era of strict, careful microscopic observation. This wasn't just a debate about embryos anymore. It was the ultimate symbol of science itself shifting its foundation away from philosophy and toward hard, observable data. In the end, though, technology is what finally killed the homunculus. As we moved into the 19th century, microscopes drastically improved. Scientists could finally see developmental stages with undeniable crystal clarity. And with the eventual rise of cell theory, the debate was settled once and for all. We learned that organisms grow from cells that divide, specialize, and multiply. There were absolutely no microscopic dolls tucked inside of us. Preformationism just faded away simply because the hard evidence against it became totally overwhelming. Section 4. How Science Moves Forward. The real legacy of the homunculus. So why does this deeply flawed, almost comical theory from the 1600s still matter to us today? Well, because it represents the true story of the scientific journey. You see, science is never just a straight line from ignorance to perfect truth. It's a messy, complicated process filled with bold guesses, spectacularly wrong turns, and fierce arguments. These scientists were absolutely brilliant people. They were just trying their best to overcome severe technological limitations while navigating all the cultural and religious biases of their time. And eventually, through gradual correction and better evidence, the scientific method actually worked. I want to leave you with this final, really powerful thought. Their answer was wrong, but the question was real.
These folks were trying to solve the absolute greatest mystery of existence. Where does new life come from? We might not believe in tiny humans living inside single cells anymore, but the awe and the curiosity that drove them to look through those blurry microscopes in the very first place, that is the exact same curiosity that drives every single great scientific discovery we make today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning everything.